Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
And today's episode is also brought to you by pelvic health professionals. Every yoga student you work with has a pelvis and a pelvic floor, and many of them are dealing with pelvic health issues at some point in their life. Yoga combined with pelvic health awareness and education is such a powerful tool to help these students. If you want to be connected with worldwide pelvic health experts and learn the most up-to-date information, check out pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And as a very special gift, because you are a podcast listener, so this is only for podcast listeners, I have a gift for you. Use the coupon code CONNECTED2021 and get a month of free access. This coupon code is valid until the end of 2021. Again, it's CONNECTED2021. And if you forget, don't worry, it's in the show notes for you. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Canadian who is learning more about what it means when you live on Indigenous land, because all of my ancestors came here to Canada from Ireland, England, Scotland, and Germany. They settled on, and I live on, Anishinaabeg, Odawa, and Mississauga land. A random fact about me is that I love comedy, but I'm super fussy about what comedy I like to watch. I am a huge Mike Birbiglia fan. I don't know if any of you also are comedy fans. If you are, tell me what you like to listen to or watch in terms of comedy. I'm always up for new suggestions. And if you are looking for a suggestion and you haven't already gone to watch Thank God for Jokes by Mike Birbiglia, I'd say watch that one first and then go watch the new one. This is not sponsored by Mike Birbiglia at all. I just want to tell you that I'm a huge fan and he makes me laugh and I really enjoy the way he shares comedy. I'm also a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, podcaster, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And this podcast was created for you so that each and every week you can feel supported and connected to the information and inspiration as you go about this journey as a yoga teacher and an entrepreneur. And as yoga teachers in our work of caring for others and helping others feel better in their bodies, in their minds, in their spirits, we can put this on the back burner, this self-care. Burnout and exhaustion is a really common thing among yoga teachers, among entrepreneurs, among parents, among humans walking on earth. And back when I started this podcast, that's how we kicked things off. I was talking way back at the beginning about my own kind of roller coaster ride of teaching so many classes a week and forgetting to add in the self-care. And it's been something that I've been working on, and I'm not at this place where I feel like I have it all figured out. It's definitely something that I review, I reflect on, and I can feel it in my body, in my brain, just in my whole being when I'm starting to get to that brownout. And we have a few podcasts on burnout, brownout, being exhausted, really taking care of ourselves as yoga teachers. And I think as we're getting ready to close out this year, it's also so important for us to reflect on our self-care. How have we done? We've all been dealing with a lot in this time of the pandemic. And then what would we like to have going into the new year in terms of self-care? And that's why I think this episode just comes at the perfect time. Chara Caruthers is on the podcast today to talk to us about Ayurveda and self-care and how these two things really are intertwined for yoga teachers. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you might remember Chara. She was on the podcast in episode 203 and 173 with Maria Kirsten talking about yoga, politics, and social justice. And I want to just share with you, connected yoga teachers, that it has been with a very heavy heart listening to these episodes again. We've got this one this week with Chara where we talk about her podcast with Maria. And then next week we have a podcast episode with Maria that I recorded with Maria in January of 2021. So at the very beginning of this year. And in April of 2021, Maria passed away. And I didn't know Maria that well, but I feel like we developed a fast friendship. And Chara, Maria, and I had this plan of let's talk more often. We all love talking about yoga and podcasting and all kinds of topics. And so I've been holding on to these episodes for a little bit because I wanted to be in the space where I could listen to Chara's wisdom. And I knew that it would remind me of Maria and missing her, and then also listening to Maria's, and I wanted to put them together. For those of you who don't know Chara, she's a registered yoga teacher and certified yoga therapist who's been practicing yoga since 1993. She's a wellness coach, registered Ayurvedic practitioner with AAPNA, and professional member of National Ayurvedic Medical Association, NAMA. As the founder of Bliss Body and Soul, she offers Ayurveda courses, workshops, and an Ayurvedic living community. As I said, Chara also hosts a podcast called Live Like You Love Yourself, where she shares more about how to live, age, parent, and just be more vibrantly engaged in the process of quote unquote growing up in a way that feels balanced, authentic, graceful, and juicy. And I'm so glad that Chara is continuing on with the podcast as well. And I know that couldn't have been an easy decision after Maria's passing, but I feel like it's such a gift to yoga teachers. So make sure you go and check out her podcast. Today, we talk about everything related to self-care for yoga teachers, including the vital role that Ayurveda plays in that. So if you've learned a little bit about Ayurveda, or if you know nothing about it at all, don't worry, you don't need to know anything for today's episode. We're really going to dive in and talk about how to integrate Ayurveda into your own practice. And so this is a great episode to listen to if you're needing to build in that self-care and make sure that it's there supporting you. Now, before we dive in and learn about Ayurveda and self-care with Chara Caruthers, I want to say a huge thank you to our sponsor, Schedulicity. What an amazing team over there. I am so honored that they make this podcast possible for our connected yoga teachers. They are doing great things in terms of keeping our calendar organized as studios and yoga teachers, and also really supporting the work that we do as professionals. So let's hear the hot tip of the week from the team over at Schedulicity.
Hey there, connected yoga teachers. This is Mickey with the Schedulicity hot tip of the week. Human beings are not machines. We can only endure so much before we need a break. Yoga teachers treat both the physical and mental well-being of their clients, and that can sometimes take its own mental and emotional toll. When you need a break, Schedulicity makes it easy to create a block of personal time. Carve out a little bit of time for yourself and rest assured that it will be protected in your schedule. Online clients will not know that you're taking a break. They'll only see the times that you are available, so you can practice self-care and avoid burnout.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity. And for those of you who are looking for an online booking software system, check out Schedulicity for sure if you're in North America. And we have a coupon code for you. It's CYT 2 months, and that will get you 2 months of free access, whether you're using Schedulicity now or if you'd like to try it out. And if you can't remember the coupon code because you're on the go, I get it. It's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/248. Speaking of our website, Connected Yoga Teachers, I don't know if you have checked out our search engine on there, and our show notes. So just to let you know, when I'm searching for something, if I'm thinking, oh gosh, when did we talk about self-care or Ayurveda on the podcast previously, I will go and use the search engine. It's so handy. I will just type at the top of our website, Ayurveda, and it'll pop up. So if you are on the go and you think, well, where were those show notes again? I can't remember the number of the episode. Totally fine. Just go home to your computer or use your phone and just go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and search for Ayurveda. Also, Crunch does such an amazing job with our show notes. She has all of the topics there with timestamps ready for you. And it's such a handy way to go back if you're wanting to review what we talked about. I want to give a big shout out of thank you also to Ray, who left a review back in August of this year. Ray said, I would like to express my gratitude for the time and effort you put forth to make this podcast. It is an amazing service for yoga teachers and health professionals. I have gained so much insight and inspiration from your sharings. You are making a difference, Ray. Thank you so much, Ray. It warms my heart to know that the podcast is making a difference for you as a yoga teacher, because I know the difference that yoga teachers are making in this world. So if we can support you, that means that you can share more yoga out into the world, and that's amazing. Thank you so much. Alrighty, connected yoga teachers, let's dive in and meet Chara and learn how we can really use Ayurveda to support the self-care that we need to keep going as yoga teachers. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Chara. It is fantastic to have you back.
Oh, it's so good to be here. I always love talking with you, Shannon.
So tell our listeners who maybe don't know who you are, what is the work that you do and who do you do it for?
I'm a multi-talented, multifaceted person. I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner. I'm a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist. And primarily, for years, I've been working mainly with women who between the ages like 35 and 55. And most recently, I've kind of zeroed in on working with yoga teachers because I love yoga teachers. I love the work they do. And for a long time, I've recognized the value of Ayurveda for yoga teachers and the fact that most yoga teachers don't know much about it.
It's so true.
Yeah.
I'm excited that today we get to talk about self-care. I feel like you and I just catching up before we hit record was like, the world right now needs a lot of self-care, like the whole planet, all of our communities, no matter where we are in the world. What do you think our yoga teachers, how do you think Ayurveda comes into that, first of all? How does that connect to self-care?
Well, the short answer is that Ayurveda is all about self-care. So when we look at yoga, and Ayurveda as sort of two separate, nobody can see this, but I've got one hand and we got yoga. The other hand, we've got Ayurveda. The view is that yoga, the focus of yoga is the mind. And if you read the Yoga Sutras, it's so clear. It talks all about the mind and how the state of our mind. I won't dive too deeply into it, but it's really about us getting a better understanding of the way that the mind kind of runs the show and how to kind of get that, I don't want to say under control, but how to live with that in a way that allows us to realize who we really are. That's a long description of yoga. And then Ayurveda is often referred to as yoga's sister science. And the focus of Ayurveda is the body and really the body-mind. So Ayurveda is really about living longer. It's a system of health and wellness that focuses on longevity. And so when you think about it in that sense, you realize Ayurveda is all about self-care.
That's amazing. Yeah. So when I think of Ayurveda, and I have a very limited knowledge on this, I think of the doshas and the seasons. Yeah. So does our self-care change then with who I am made up, like what my dosha is, and then also what season I'm in?
The short answer is yes. So in order for us to care for ourselves, it means that the way that we kind of do it is that we listen to what people out in the world tell us about what we should eat, and we should run, or we should wear these clothes, or we should do, et cetera, et cetera. But what Ayurveda wants us to understand is that the way that we actually care for ourselves is by understanding who we are and how we operate. And that begins first with understanding that we are, in Ayurveda, we say we're a microcosm of the macrocosm. So what's going on out in the world is also going on inside of us. And so that means that as things change outside of us, whether that's a political change or a weather change or a seasonal change, or even an environment change, like from, being in the house to being in the car, or, to being in a plane or something like that, it has an impact on what is happening within our mind and within our physiology. And if we just stop for a second and think about that, we know this is true, right? We know when you go, if you're inside, you're in your own home, maybe you're feeling really cozy, maybe your mind relaxes a little, your body relaxes a little, maybe you can digest things a little bit better, your food or whatever it is. And then maybe if you go outside and you're trying to, eat lunch outdoors in the middle of a gale, a wind blowing, there's a shift in your mental state even. And maybe there's a bit of resistance there mentally. And then your body is also resisting, which means that it's doing work that means that it can't maybe digest as well. So each of us as individuals, that's another principle of Ayurveda, have a different ways of dealing with or processing what's going on outside, or inside or around us based on who we are. And so Ayurveda is really about, one, just embracing that we are constantly shifting, we're constantly in flux, and then tuning us into our natural tendencies. Like an example of that would be, I do not like the cold at all, do not like it. And so I already know if you sit me outside and if I'm cold, forget it, whether I'm outside or inside, it's going to have an impact on my mental and emotional state and on my physical state as well. And you may be a completely different. You might be like, oh, cold, I love the cold. If I'm, and so your physiological and mental response to that might be different. So Ayurveda wants us to know who we are and to know how we are, so that we can make smarter choices for the things that we engage with, whether that be food or people or environments or yoga.
This is really fascinating to me when you're talking about the cold. So it's very snowy here right now outside. I feel like I say that a lot on the podcast. That's because it's a lot of the time here where I live in Canada. But
yeah,
I kind of rail against and struggle in the wintertime. I know that about myself. I take my vitamin D because I'm Canadian and we don't get a lot here.
Yeah.
But I also make myself go out in the cold. Like I feel so much better once I get out in the fresh air. So how do we get to know this individual part of us? Like, where do we find that information? First of all, maybe that's where we could start.
Well, so this is where the doshas come in. So, and I won't dive too deeply into explaining the doshas because they're always confusing, but I will be able to kind of give you an overview of what they're about. So the Ayurvedic idea is that energy is everything. And we get this too. I was thinking about this morning. If you just sit quietly for a moment and just tune in, you can feel your body mind idling, right? As opposed to like if you sit in your car and you just turn the car on and you just sit there, there's a buzz, there's something that lets you know that this is on, this is alive, for lack of a better term. And so in the Ayurvedic view, that energy drives everything that we do. It drives the way our cells work, the way the way all of our tissues work and interact with each other. And that energy also drives or I suppose I can say kind of, it has qualities to it that that show up in how we look, that show up in the kind of choices that we make, or the things that we are maybe more, I don't know, the things that the word is not coming to me for some reason, but the things that we are most likely to choose in our lives. So in other words, you've seen people who are what we might consider to be kind of type A folks, who are quite intense. You've also seen people who are very artistic and creative and wispy and not intense. And then you've also seen folks who are maybe a little more kind of homebody-ish, or maybe a little bit more settled and calm. And typically when we talk about Ayurveda, we put people into those kinds of categories. But I don't like doing that. That's why I don't like to talk so much about the doshas. What's important is that we understand how those energies work within us. So if you have a little bit, if you feel angry when it's hot outside, that is your pitta energy. In other words, that's just part of the energy of you. And so if and there's other examples of that kind of thing. But what's most important is that we understand, that we notice how environments make us feel and react. So this cold thing is a perfect example. The heat thing is another thing. There's lots of examples of that. Rather than trying to put ourselves in a particular box, we notice, and you'll start to see trends, for lack of a better term, or patterns of your behavior, your physical behavior and your mental and emotional behavior. And that's where you start.
Well, this sounds, no wonder it's the sister science to yoga, because that's so much about yoga, like noticing that thing about yourself. And I also love how you called in how we hear lots of messages out in the world of like, this is what you should do with your body. And it doesn't make sense because it's very individual. Why would what you do make sense for my body, right?
Exactly.
What are some of the things that you think are Ayurveda self-care tips or ideas that yoga teachers could use on the days when it feels like things are overwhelming?
Wow. Okay. So you remember how I talked about that feeling of idle, that low buzz. So to me, that buzz, that feeling has become an indicator. It's become an indicator of how my mind and body are processing my experience of life. And so if you start to tune into that buzz, it shifts in its intensity and amplitude. And that if you're really anxious, it might feel almost like a shake. It might feel, it might go from being just a low zzz to like, that kind of a feeling. So the first thing I think I would recommend is just to tune into that. I think a little bit about, I teach Ayurveda for yoga teachers. And one of the first things that I try to do is help people understand the connection between yoga and Ayurveda as laid out by the sutras. And I can't remember which sutra it is offhand, but one of the sutras basically talks about all of the different obstacles to practicing yoga. And when I talk about practicing yoga, I'm not talking about asana. Yes, asana for sure, but I'm really talking about yoga as a living science, yoga as our ability to be centered and our ability to feel and to move through the world as our authentic selves. So disease is one of them. And so what that really means is that we have this responsibility, first and foremost, to make really smart choices for ourselves. And it starts with tuning into where we are and how we are. So if that idol is a high idol today, and then maybe we need to make choices that are going to allow us to come back to center. So what does that mean in kind of the form of a tip? We've got all the tools as yogis. We got the breathing, we got the yoga, we've got the asana, we've got the meditation. And so it starts by tuning into first to where you are today, and that may be completely different to where you were yesterday, and then making your choices for choosing from your toolkit relative to your current state. And so that may mean, for me, that might mean doing, if I have a morning practice, which I do, and today it might be child's pose for, 5 minutes, and just breathing, as opposed to something that's moving and dynamic and that feels like it's going to key me up a little bit. It might be, doing some pranayama instead of doing any asana practice. So really, I think the first and most important tip for anyone is to tune in. It's just to tune in, and then and it's so hard, but to have the courage to choose for what you need right now in this moment. And that's really why I'm teaching yoga teachers this, because I want them to pass that on to their students.
I really appreciate that you're teaching this to yoga teachers. And I want to say, as a yoga teacher who has definitely seen my practice fall away, like I've been very open about that on the podcast, that it can be a struggle to like get to my mat every single day. You said that you have a morning practice. So what does that look like? Because I think the times when I really fell away from practice, I think I had very high expectations of what that practice looks like. So do you want to tell us, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So the Ayurvedic, the foundation for practicing Ayurveda is what we call dinacharya. And dinacharya is a Sanskrit word that means daily routine. And if you look in the Ayurvedic text, dinacharya has like 20 odd items on it. Do this, get up, do this, do that, do it. And it's just, in a modern world, when we've got so many other responsibilities, you look at that list and it's just daunting. So the point of the list really is or the point of dinacharya is, if we can take small steps every day, like if you can imagine taking care of your car, most of us just drive that thing into the ground. And when something goes wrong, we're like, let's get this to the mechanic. But if we can take small steps every day, then we can keep the car on the road. And so what we have to do as modern people living in a modern world is recognize that trying to do too many things is actually contributing to the breakdown, as opposed to contributing to the support of the mind and body. So we have to choose small things on a daily basis, or we have to choose what we can, in the Ayurvedic sort of term, is what we can digest, what we can properly integrate. Because remember, digestion is a huge thing in Ayurveda, from the physical digestion to the mental and emotional digestion. We are all always digesting our experiences, our environment. We have to take it all in. We have to extract the good stuff, and then we have to let go of the bad stuff. And so for me, a routine shifts slightly depending on what's going on, but typically it will be something good for my body. So it may be some kind of movement. And for me, movement, the purpose that movement serves for me is to feel into where I am today physically. So it's my practice, is, it may be standing up, feeling myself on my feet, and then kind of moving around and kind of, whatever. It's some kind of movement that allows me to feel something. And that feeling is information. And that information drives what I call discernment. So in yoga, we have this term discernment. And what I translate that to mean in the real world is making the right choice for you, for right now. And we need information in order to do that. So a lot of my daily practice is about gathering information about where I am. And then it's also about settling the body too. So there'll be a little bit of movement in there. I'm an early riser. Ayurveda recommends that you get up early. And for lots of reasons, it's a peaceful time of the day, which means you can start the day in a peaceful remember macrocosm, microcosm, what's going on inside is going on outside. So you can start the day in a peaceful place. And then, as I mentioned, digestion is a big thing. And so things that I can do to tend to and care for my physical digestion is also important. The movement helps with that. Warm drinks help me with that, and they might help other folks with that too. The Ayurvedic view is that warm drinks are great for lots of folks because they just kind of kickstart the digestion. And then warm food, but maybe not too much food. Outside of that, the usual, brush your teeth, wash your face, all that sort of stuff to kind of keep the car clean, that kind of thing.
I also really appreciate that you said, in the world that we live in, adding too many things to that list would contribute to that. And I feel like over the years as a yoga teacher, I would get away from my practice when the seasons change, I notice things shift for me.
Mm.
Like I want to do something different. I know that about myself now.
Yeah.
And also this point of the movement has really changed for me. At times, I have gotten so caught up in wanting to learn more yoga, to teach more yoga, or wanting to shape my body into shapes or a way that it shows up in the world. Like that has gotten into that movement practice. So, being in this place where like, I'm going to check in and I want to feel something, and then that will determine what I do. On the flip side of it, what about the yoga teacher who's like, well, I teach 6 classes a week, so I get my yoga in, and or I don't have time for a morning practice. Anything that you might say to those yoga teachers?
I get it. I so get it. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be here talking with you about this, in part because I see what we do to ourselves as teachers, as yoga teachers, very specifically. And yoga teacher is, for many of us, is just an intersection. We're mothers, where we might have some other role that we're playing. We may be caregivers for somebody in our family, especially now. And so there's this tendency for us to kind of throw ourselves under the bus, and for us to not tune in to what's happening in our bodies and in our minds, not use that, not even seek that information, because if it's going to change what I do every day, if it's going to change what I have to choose, I make my breakfast. I know exactly what it is. I make my whatever. I've got all of my patterns that I follow, and anything outside of that I don't have time for. The harsh reality of that is that it's a recipe for disaster. It will shorten your life, period. And that's kind of, that feels like it's a pretty full-on claim. But I think what we have to understand is that we have a responsibility to ourselves to look after ourselves. That's just it. And I know it's hard, and I know our society, there's a lot of messages out in our society about self-care, that it's self-indulgent and that it's, selfish and all the rest of it. But if we're not going to take care of ourselves, our bodies, our minds, who will? And, and if no one's taking care of themselves, then we end up in a world where everyone is broken or everyone is compromised in some way. And we can start to see that. We can see that around us.
Mm-hmm.
And it reinforces it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I was like, when I was parenting little children, I felt like I don't have time. And as I got to realize like what self-care actually feels like, I know that it serves the people around me when I take care of myself. Like everyone benefits. So it
definitely.
I find this even with my own, like, let's say I'm putting together something for yoga teachers or the podcast or
Yeah.
whatever, when I start to really think, oh gosh, it's kind of like moving through mud here. Like, why am I not getting anywhere? I have to really turn inward and say, what's going on with my own self-practice? Maybe I'm even showing up to my practice in a very distracted way. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. As well as that, I think as teachers, the role that we play in the world, and everybody has a role like this in, with someone in their family or somebody in our community. We're models for, it sounds a little, I don't want it to sound too high and mighty, but we're in many ways models for how to be. All of us are models in some ways. As parents, we're models for our children. As teachers, we're models for our students and potentially our peers and the rest of the world. And so, not to put any pressure on folks, but what we're doing when we take care of ourselves, when we when we take the time to know ourselves, I was just talking with Jay Brown about this the other day, actually, because he was sort of saying, look, I need space around, if I'm going to teach a class or if I've got a bunch of things that are happening, there's a little bit of space that I need around that just to kind of gather myself. And sometimes it feels really challenging to ask for that space. He works from home, he's got a family, he's got a wife. We've all had these situations. It becomes it feels challenging to ask for the space that you need to take care of yourself. But what we're doing when we don't is that we're telling our children and we're telling our students, look, don't worry about you. Don't take care of yourself. You constantly be looking out into the world to what it needs and then respond to that.
Right.
And that's not a solution for longevity.
No.
And even besides longevity, just again, as I was saying, what message does that put out into the world about who we are and how valuable we are and our own worth, et cetera,
So true that people are watching what we're doing and people are okay with us having bad days in that. Like,
yeah.
If you're showing up for your own self-practice and your own self-care, that doesn't mean that every day is easy. I love this example that you shared of Jay Brown taking that time when I used to teach at a studio, which feels very long ago now. I stopped teaching at the studio before the pandemic, but still it adds a whole other layer of like long ago. I used to love that setting up time. Like I worked it in so that I would go, set up, be all ready half an hour before my class, which we just had that space in the studio to be able to do that. And it really grounded me. I remember also when my brother was having his kids, they were young, and he's like, I just need to like sit in the car for a minute when I get home from work. Before I go in. Like I just have to like decompress from that work day. Yeah. Wait a moment and then I'll be prepared for my family type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. And you mentioned, what about the yoga teacher who's like, I teach 6 classes a day and I don't have time, or I get my movement in. When we think about the purpose of yoga, which in my mind is really about self-realization, it's about knowing yourself. So all of these things that we do in yoga, whether it's the movement or the breathing or the whatever it might be, the engaging in the world, that the idea is that serves us knowing ourselves. And so when we're not taking the time to know ourselves, when we're not tuning in, we're just like, I'm just going to go from one place to the next to this, to the when we don't have that moment of decompression to actually digest everything we've been consuming, we don't. I don't know. I mean, I suppose you could argue that we don't move forward, or we're not truly practicing yoga.
Yeah. And this is a tough thing. I know that we have listeners who have busy lives. They have other jobs. Like you said, they're caregivers, they're looking after children. They are also, teaching a pile of classes and trying to make ends meet. Some of them are studio owners or so many things.
Mm.
And this is really the practice that supports that.
Yeah.
Someone just reached out to me in an email today and she said, I really want to take a yoga teacher training. And I said, start with a regular practice. Like, it is hard for me to say that, but I mean that it's really the best service to yourself. If you never took a yoga teacher training and that didn't ever happen, you would still have this like self-care practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is missing. What do you think about that? This is me really weighing in, but I think that's missing in the communication that happens before we sign up for yoga teacher training.
That we need our own practice.
Yeah.
I think firstly, I totally agree. I definitely agree with that. And when you look at it, you can see that there's so much built around it. There's the fact that yoga teacher trainings are the financial, core of a lot of yoga studios, and interestingly enough, it feels like even more so now that we can take things online, and those limits of actually having kind of, bodies in rooms aren't there. So it seems like some of the trainings have been ratcheted up, and people can, I won't go on too much about it, but there's lots of information out there about that. So there's that. There's then that in some ways can take away the incentive for a yoga teacher training school, or even just the yoga industrial complex. I don't know, the yoga, business or whatever it is, just to say, ho, wait a minute, slow down a sec. So wait a minute, So there is that folks are really being pushed into it. There's also, I think, there's this undercurrent in our society that is all about intensity. And yoga isn't as much about intensity as it is about subtlety. And in order to experience that subtlety, we have to, we got to be willing to listen for it, to listen into nothing. That's so hard. It's so hard to be like, I don't hear anything. You're quiet. I don't, there's nothing happening. What's happening? Is this supposed to be happening? Is there something supposed to be happening? That's the way that we engage with the world. So that ability to slow down and to even believe that starting with yourself, as opposed to taking some crazy and intense action in the world, is going to be more of a solution. That's something, it's almost like a cultural hurdle we have to get over as people, because, being in the world these days starts with doing. It's like, I am nothing if I'm not out there doing something. And so we just don't, if someone says, oh no, start by just tuning in, start by just paying attention to what's happening to you, feeling into your body, all the rest of it, there's an immediate resistance. There's immediate disbelief in that's going to get you anywhere. And that's what we have to kind of overcome, especially now. We were talking at the beginning of this before we got on about the pandemic, and what I'm seeing, and more so what I'm feeling, is that the impact of this pandemic is so incredibly subtle. It's so subtle. It's like it's kind of like, and I don't want to be really provocative in terms of the terms and things that I use, but it feels a little bit like a tsunami in that, tsunami's like, people are just standing on the beach, and it's like, ooh, things are just, you're noticing, and the tide is moving out kind of slowly moving, it pulls out, and everybody's kind of just going, ooh, what's going on here? And then maybe just kind of going about their way. And then it starts to come back in, and then it just kind of overwhelms. And it feels like, just from my own personal experience of it, which has been, I'm in Australia. There's not, in terms of COVID, we've been incredibly lucky here. But I don't want to diminish the impact that this pandemic has had on everyone around the world, regardless of what their kind of hands-on experience with COVID has been. There's this really low rumbling undercurrent of despair and dismay and, all kinds of things, and if you've had somebody die, or you've had people that have gotten really sick, or you've lost your job, or whatever it is, that may be that much stronger. And so as teachers, because yoga teachers are in the same boat, everybody's struggling to try to figure out what they're going to do, how to serve their communities, etc. We're all in the boat of trying to process what we've experienced. Everything from our routines being changed, and not being able to move around the world or even in our environments in the way that we're used to those bigger things that I mentioned. And so if we don't have the willingness or the ability just to be quiet for a moment and to tune into where the tide is, whether it's pulling right out, or whether it's starting to come in and we're starting to feel swamped and, overwhelmed, it's going to be on us before we have time to take any action. And that's why I think I'm hearing this around too. I think the next big pandemic is going to be a mental health crisis. And we're already starting to see it.
Yeah. I think you're right. I check in with different friends, and, everyone's like, yeah, we're doing okay, and da-da-da. But underneath, I definitely feel it in myself.
Yeah, me too.
It was like a light bulb when you were saying this, though, because our initial reaction, if you were thinking about a tsunami coming in, is like fight, flight, or freeze. Like you got to do something right then. And a lot of what we've faced this year, in the past year, has felt like that too. You said, instead of just like getting out there and doing something, which is what we're wired to do and praised to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about even the social justice movement. There's like this push-pull, like I'm supposed to get out and do something.
Yes.
And yet I can't do that unless I take care of myself. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think, and that's all in line with exactly, what we've been talking about so far. Every social justice advocate and teacher and that I've spoken to over the last year has said, first and foremost, that we need to rest. And I remember even Michelle Johnson had said this. And I remember the first question that came into my own head as an Ayurvedic practitioner for more than a decade is, how do we do that? How do we do that? For me, all the inquiry always starts with those questions. So I love diving into questions. I like to frame challenges in the form of a question, because it gives me something to kind of sink my teeth into. And I thought, this is the question that a lot of people are going to be asking. If we're supposed to rest, what does that mean? I can't go on vacation. I can't, whatever it is. And so what we do is we look to all of our traditional forms of what rest is. Sleep, great. You would absolutely need your sleep. But a lot of downtime, or a lot of our traditional forms of, rest, go to the spa or whatever it is, I don't know if they're necessarily serving us. Actually, that's not fair to say. I do believe they're serving us, but what I'm wanting to do is invite people into something a little bit deeper, which is basically just being quiet for a moment. And whether that moment is, a couple of minutes in your day, or taking a breath or two or three before you have that conversation with somebody, noticing when that idol in your mind and body is rising, or when you're feeling a little bit off, and then maybe taking some time, just a little bit of time to kind of reset. And resetting doesn't have to mean taking action. And of course, as we've been talking, rest is going to look different for everybody. And so I think we have that responsibility to tune into what rest actually feels like, what it actually is for each of us. And it really, we know when we're rested, we feel that, we feel that. I've got, I have this thing about spas, about people always say self-care is I'll have a date at the spa, and I'm like, I've never been that person. That doesn't do it for me. What does is, conversations, like real authentic conversations with friends to a point. Because if there's too much, then I can feel my energy levels getting up again, So you have to kind of tune into that. But just to speak very specifically to the social justice thing, being constantly in action and being constantly vigilant about what's happening in the world and how right or wrong it is and whatever requires energy. All of our one of my teachers, which was such a beautiful thing, one of my teachers said, mental work requires 10 times more energy than physical work. And I thought, that's right. So many of us are sitting around, or we're not going to work or doing our usual things, and we're tired. And we're like, why am I so damn tired? It's because we're processing. We're truly processing things. And so I think it's about recognizing that it's about recognizing that in order to continue the work that we do in the world, whether that's social justice work, whether that's yoga teaching, or a combination of the two, or whether that's just being ourselves, we require a level of energy, and it's our responsibility to figure out how to make that energy available to us.
That's so good. I love what you said about the mental energy. I didn't actually realize this until I had my herniated disc and couldn't do just work that would involve my mind, nothing about my body, like not even sitting. And one of my PTs said, you are going to need to rest. And I mean, you need to stop thinking about this project that you're planning. That also has to go on the back burner, which I thought, I'm just sitting here. For sure I could do this. This is so good. I appreciate this a lot, especially if, like you say, which we are hearing a lot of, people are really struggling with mental health right now. Yoga teachers are they're on the front lines of that with people, working one-on-one, working in groups. And so it's like we need to put our mask on and then go out and serve when we can, take a break, and like someone else needs to get out there. It's like first responder type thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a moment, normally as yoga teachers, we feel a responsibility to hold space for, our communities, whoever those communities are. And now in a potentially diminished place a potentially diminished or compromised place ourselves. So, relative to all that stuff I talked about, our job status and whatever else is going on, our own health status, we feel an even heightened responsibility to hold space for our communities. And so to me, that spotlights the critical importance of self-care for us, because, if we're trying to give from a place of, depletion, we're going to put ourselves in an even worse situation. And so that's part of the reason why I'm really wanting to talk to yoga teachers about self-care and just tune them into what that actually means for them. And only they know, but it's important that that we begin that process of looking into ourselves and looking outside of ourselves at our environments and how they're impacting how we feel. And by environment, I mean everything from our diets to the work that we're doing, to the rooms that we're in, the clothes we're wearing, the rooms that we're sitting in. All of those things have an impact.
Oh, that's amazing. Are there any last bits that you can think might help the yoga teacher who's like, okay, I know I want to come into this place, tune in, or find that rest. Is there anything that has helped you along the journey, or you've seen help other yoga teachers?
There's a lot of things that have helped me. I think perhaps the biggest thing is this willingness to let go of my own beliefs about what anything is supposed to look like and how anything is supposed to, operate, or letting go of my expectations on all levels. And to me, honestly, that has helped me so much as an American, and everybody has been impacted by what's been going on in the States. But that has really helped me to maintain a level of, I don't want to say equanimity because I haven't been, but maintain my energy levels through all of the stuff, or a lot of the stuff that's actually been happening, where we've been kind of drawn to polarize ourselves into one camp or another. And when we look out into our world, we have those same polarizing views about everything. This is good food. This is bad food. This is good movement. This is bad movement. This is the way things should be in my class. People should be doing what I'm telling them to do or not. This is the way my kids should behave, the way my partner should behave, etc. A willingness to just kind of let go of that. In Ayurveda, we talk about, I don't want to keep going with more. We could talk forever, but in Ayurveda, we do talk about this concept that everybody is an individual. Everything is individual. And as such, we have to celebrate that individuality and recognize that their function, their purpose in the world is different to ours. And so we have to begin to see that and celebrate those aspects and qualities of them. So if we can do that about the things around us, and especially the things that we engage with, what's the word in yoga? Vairagya. So it's this letting go of our attachment. To me, that frees up so much energy, so much mental energy, so much, that's to me that moment for your cousin where he sits in the car and he just goes, oh, and he just says, I'm going to just put everything down, So to me, that's a really powerful tool because it creates a space, it creates some clarity, and it creates a strong foundation for us to make right choices for ourselves.
Yeah, it does take a lot of energy to grip and control. This is one thing I've played with in my own meditation practice over the years.
Yeah.
So the work that you do now with yoga teachers, do you focus more on let's find your own Ayurveda? Let's learn more about Ayurveda for you, or let's learn more about Ayurveda for your students, or both?
Both. So yeah, one of the things that I've certainly learned as a yoga teacher is that everything starts from me. It starts from, I think it was Judith Lassiter who said, practice for your students, teach for yourself. And I believe that and when I'm practicing, whatever it is I'm practicing, whether it's a physical practice or whether it's a practice of saying yes to the right things and no to the wrong things, I am learning and experiencing things that will be expressed either very outwardly expressed or expressed in who I am to my students. And so in terms of Ayurveda, in terms of teaching yoga teachers Ayurveda, the key thing for me is when I say key thing, I mean, one of my biggest goals when teaching them is to have them embrace and integrate Ayurveda into their own lives. And in doing that, there's a natural expression into the lives of their students. So that's definitely one. And then also in the course that I teach for yoga teachers, I actually do also teach them specific tools for engaging their students. And it's really about the tools that I'm sharing with them are really about inviting and empowering their students to own their own practices. So the Ayurvedic view, as I said, is individuality. And how does that translate in a class full of 20 students or 30 students or whatever it is? How do we do that? And there are tools. It starts from an understanding of what you're seeing, what you're looking at, what you're potentially dealing with, energetic wise, as well as sort of physical and all the rest of it. and then having a set of tools to engage students. So it's about verbalizing, it's about asking them questions, it's about inviting them into feeling into their bodies and what they're actually feeling, and giving them a framework for understanding what they're feeling and how to create, if they're feeling in some level of imbalance, how to create a sense of balance, regardless of what pose the teacher's telling you to get into, how to own that for yourself. And I find it incredibly powerful, or I should say empowering, just as a person in going into a class, if I'm a student in a class, to be able to hear the teacher, listen to what they're saying, and filter what they're saying. So it's almost like you're digesting it as it's coming in. Filter that through my own understanding of who I am and what I need right now. And it means that the classes have the potential of serving me better. And that's really what is important in yoga. I would like to think that it serves you in some way.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, yeah.
I just have this visual of like everyone coming in and then the teacher, guiding the class, and everyone is finding their own expression of that depending on what's going on with them for the day and their dosha. It's really a beautiful image. Yeah. Not people following along with everything and trying to look the same.
No. Sometimes you think, especially if you're a new teacher, there's like a panic when you're like, they're not doing what I tell them to do. Like, what do I do now? And if you come to one of my classes, it's like, it looks like a free for all. Like people are, there's some people that are kicking their leg up, and there's some people that are child's posing over here, and there's some people that are moving around and doing stuff. And to me, that just warms and melts my heart to see that, because I feel like we have to own it for ourselves if it's going to serve us truly.
Oh, that's so good. I went to a class once. We were in yoga teacher training. We knew this teacher really well. She would guide us every morning for 2 hours in our morning practice. And then one day she's like, I'm just going to play the music and you're all going to do your own practice now. And I just feel like it was one of the best gifts ever. Shout out to Amba. And I just feel like everyone did whatever they needed, and it was amazing. And I was a newer teacher, and I thought, what am I going to do? Like, no one's telling me what to do, but that goes away quickly.
Yeah, well, I think as well, and that's why the empowerment part is important, because I think for some folks, without some level of structure, that can be the scariest, most anxiety-forming thing ever.
Yes.
And so it really, as teachers, it's about understanding, how do we hold that space? What do we provide to them in terms of tools and things to play with and to contemplate, some sort of an anchor for their thinking and their movement that they can actually use so they don't feel totally untethered and cut loose.
Right.
And so that's really important. And that's what I teach in my Ayurveda for Yoga Teachers course, is really about that. Because I think once somebody's empowered enough, if the energy in the space is, kind of fly, like take it, go, own it, they will.
Yes.
They will.
Where can our yoga teachers find out more if they want to study with you and work with you?
They can go to my website, which is blissbodyandsoul.com.
We'll make sure that we link to it in the show notes. Thank you so much for this today. I feel inspired to just, add in a little bit more to my self-care. So whatever that looks like for our connected yoga teachers, it'd be fun to hear from our listeners what that looks like for them. Thank you.
Yes, it would. Thank you. It's been great chatting with you and sharing this stuff.
Oh, yeah. And also tell our listeners how they can listen to you and Maria on your podcast. Where do they find that?
Oh, that's right. You can find that at my website as well. Our podcast is called Live Like You Love Yourself. And so you can find it on all the regular podcast platforms as well, Spotify and iTunes and whatever, Google or whatever other ones are out there as well.
It's great. Yeah. It's a great podcast. I highly recommend going to have a listen.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chara.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for this today, Chara. It is always such a pleasure to talk with you, and listening to this audio again, listening to this interview gave me such comfort Connected Yoga Teachers, I would love to know from you, what were your key takeaways from today's episode with Chara? I know that one thing that I really hold, it actually holds me on each and every day. So thank you so much for this, Chara. But you saying coming to your yoga space or your practice space in the morning and just asking yourself, what do I need in this moment? This has been really powerful for me because oftentimes I was trying to think what should I do? And instead, when I really check in and I ask myself, what do I need today? That's made a big difference in my daily practice. And I have you to thank for that. Connected Yoga Teachers in the comments at the show notes. So if you went to the connectedyogateacher.com/248, I would love it if you would share some of your tips and tricks and secrets and things that you teach or do around self-care. I think we can all use support around this at different times and different stages and different seasons of our life. And especially right now, as we close out 2021, and when we reflect back on what it's been like over the last couple of years, almost 2 years living in this pandemic. So I hope that you are finding time to fit in self-care. I hope that things don't feel too heavy. And I really hope that you're building this in going forward into 2022. Now, like I said, we get to hear from Maria, which is a really special episode next week on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you. It was tough to listen to in parts for me because I really miss Maria. And I know many of you also do if you knew Maria at all. And there was also something so comforting as well. Hearing her wisdom, hearing the words that she shared. I'm really excited that you get to hear that next week. I want to thank our entire team over here, Suzanne for making the audio sound amazing, to Crunch, our resident writer, for making sure that the notes and our articles are always so well organized and written, Sinead, our community support manager, and to Erica, our virtual assistant. Oh, and that reminds me, Connected Yoga Teachers, Erica's been working at making sure to categorize our podcast episodes. So if you are looking for a specific thing, it is now in some type of a category usually. So let's say you wanted help teaching online yoga, go to the connectedyogateacher.com, click on resources or hover over resources, and you'll see a large drop-down menu, and you can see, for example, if you wanted to know everything about yoga for pain, then we've compiled all of those episodes together. Or if you want to dig into how to market your yoga, there's a section there, or running a yoga business. If you feel like we're missing a section or a category, let us know, and we'll see if we have enough episodes to go into that. Thank you so much for being here today with me, Connected Yoga Teachers. It means a lot. I know that your time is full. I know that you're doing a lot of things out in the world, and it just means a lot that we're here right until the end, hanging out together, learning about how we can take care of ourselves to really support the work that we do out in this world. And I'm also curious, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?